Two, one.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Objective, day 198 of the war in Israel. Today, we're talking about the Biden administration sanctioning a unit in the IDF. This is the Netzer Yehuda Battalion, and they're being sanctioned by the American government for actions which have been taken in the West Bank. This was confirmed by Anthony Blinken at a press conference recently under what are called the Leahy laws and vetting process, which the State Department has. And so these kind of sanctions mean that this battalion or this unit, whatever, is not going to be able to receive any American weaponry, and they're not going to be able to partake in any joint drills with the US military. Netanyahu's spoken out against this. He said that this is an absurd thing to be doing whilst Israel's at war, and he's going to push back against it in any way that he can, presumably through diplomatic channels. And then Smotrich as well, who's the finance minister, said that this was just absolutely crazy. And so, Daniel, what more can you tell us about this?
So yeah, when we were talking about so as you mentioned, it's a Netzer Yehuda battalion. What's special about this battalion is it's almost, I think, exclusively for Haredi Jews, which are the sort of like ultra-Orthodox Jews that have strict adherence to, all kinds of like different Jewish laws. And basically, the reason why there's this unique battalion is that these Haredi Jews are actually exempt from the IDF mandatory service, so they don't have to, the men of military age don't have to serve in the IDF as others do. But for those who want to volunteer, they set up. I think there is this one, Netzer Yehuda battalion, and I believe there's also one like air battalion or a different section for the air. So yeah, that's basically what it is. And so this brigade or this battalion is under Kfir Brigade, which operates mainly in the West Bank. I believe after October 7th, it also operated in the border areas around Gaza, but it was always mainly deployed in the West Bank. And the main basically mission is counterterrorism, apprehension of Palestinian militants, raids, patrols, and manning checkpoints. So and you mentioned the Netanyahu quote, and he even said that while our soldiers are fighting the horror of terrorism, the intentions to place sanctions on the IDF unit is most absurd and moral decry. And yeah, it's really crazy to put sanctions on the one or on one of the battalions that's specifically meant to combat terrorism. But yeah, this whole thing is just crazy. You have the one civilized, or the one actual like Western country in the Middle East, and the idea that you put sanctions on these nations out of all, the one that has been attacked on October 7th, and the one that is trying to defend itself, the one that is probably one of the militaries that is the most careful about civilian casualties, which we would probably criticize. I think it is doing it on basically IDF is trying to protect Palestinian civilians or even Palestinian militants, basically, instead of actually trying to defend their own citizens. So we would say this is to its fault. But yeah, this whole thing is just crazy. I have more things to say generally about, but what do you think about this whole story?
I mean, this is coming in a context of sanctions against settlers in the West Bank, I think, that happened a few months ago, which we covered. And so this law, the Leahy law, I think that's how you say it, originally coming from Patrick Leahy, who's been a significant, kind of politician at high levels of government in recent years, is a process which is proper, the kind of vetting process that they have, in the sense that if you're going to be giving foreign aid, in a sense, to foreign militaries, you want some standard by which you're going to judge it, but is kind of, if you look at the how they're judging it and the procedures that they have. It is kind of influenced by the just war theory perspective, it seems, that we've spoken about on the channel. And I think that part of the sanctioning of West Bank settlers, but particularly of the IDF here, is part of the casting of Israel as a pariah nation, which we've seen in so many examples recently, perhaps most notably in the ICJ case from South Africa. Because if you go look at the other militaries which are sanctioned under these processes, it's countries like the militaries of countries like Pakistan, Turkey, who else? Lebanon, right? So these are not exactly rights respecting countries where their militaries go and fight for freedom and justice. Countries where there's real concerns about some of the military action has been taken. And Patrick Leahy, who again is the kind of sponsor of the law originally and who gives his name to it, was quoted in Haaretz in 2011 as saying that whilst he supports Israel's right to defend itself, he thinks that the blockade of Gaza is collective punishment, and he thinks there's very serious concerns about what's going on in the West Bank. And then he signed a letter to the State Department, who goes over the vetting process, saying that he thinks there needs to be a serious kind of reevaluation of the vetting of Israel and of Egypt. Now, that was in the years following the Arab Spring, right? And the Egyptian military is not exactly a good or proper military. There's lots of stories and history of the abuse that they've perpetrated against their own people. And to say that you think there needs to be a review of Egypt and Israel is to cast these two completely unequal countries, which are on completely different strata of moral legitimacy, as if they were equal. And I think that's what you see going on. And this further sanctioning of this IDF unit is just a whole other part of that. And I mean, you said something interesting before we went live about the way they use this idea of the right to self-defense, which maybe we can speak about.
Yeah, so you mentioned Senator Leahy, and so these sets of laws, I think, were first or came into law in, I think, late 90s, like 98 or something. And this is not the first time that it was trying to be used against Israel. So as you mentioned, it was trying to be used in 2011. And Senator Leahy came out himself, and he said, something that we heard from October 7th, and we still hear now. I support Israel's right to self-defense. This but brings us to a concept or an idea that Ayn Rand called a floating abstraction. For those who don't know, it's a idea that you have this concept in your mind, but it's completely separated from any sort of actual concretes. So, these people say, I support Israel's right to self-defense. But let's say, quoting specifically Senator Leahy, he would say something like, but he disagrees with restrictions on imports of goods into Gaza as it amounts to collective punishment with Israel's use of excessive force in Gaza, which has caused the deaths of hundreds of civilians. So this was in 2011. And so they support Israel's right to self-defense when it gets attacked, but it should still allow food to go into an enemy country. And it should prevent basically all, here he says hundreds of civilian casualties. Imagine trying to wage a war properly defend yourself, properly defend your citizens with no casualties, no civilian casualties, especially in the regions such as Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas, who has, frankly, if there is one good I don't know what to even call it. One thing Hamas succeeded in is infiltrating the civilian population and completely blending themselves in it. So there is no way to basically kill a Hamas soldier without hurting some civilians. Yet, Israel has been doing a pretty good job at actually preventing civilian casualties. But even if it does that perfectly, it's never enough. So this is why this is where the concept of the floating abstraction comes in. There is nothing. Basically, Israel has a right to defend itself, but we won't say what it is, and there is no way to actually do it. We just say you have it, but it honestly doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and when we were discussing this before we went live, I think that probably is what part of what's going on, that they have this idea as a floating abstraction, and when Leahy makes a comment like that, he doesn't see the incompatibility of saying that you hold the right to self-defense whilst then going on to say what he says about collective punishment. But I think also part of it, and this is going to vary from politician to politician, is that there's just some dishonesty going on, in the sense that politicians know, if you're a Western politician for the most part, that you have to say something about Israel having the right to defend itself. But then also you're expected to say that they're too harsh on the civilian population and all this kind of stuff. So in a sense, they're just to some extent, just parroting what they think they have to say. And I mean, and then just briefly on the civilian population, I think part of the dishonesty as well is it's not only do Western leaders who get very heavily briefed on these kind of things and who follow the details of the war fairly closely, it seems. Not only do they know about the use of human shields, and not only do they know about Hamas not wearing uniforms and their infiltration and integration into the civilian population, they'll know about how in 2014 Hamas called for civilians to stand on the tops of roofs so that the IDF couldn't bomb the buildings, and that civilians went and did it and willingly went along and did it. So that there is not only are Hamas infiltrated into the civilian population, but the civilian population is supportive. So yeah, there's dishonesty going on. I also think the idea of collective punishment, we've criticized it in various ways when it's coming from journalistic sources or commentators. But when it's coming from politicians, particularly a United States politician, that's when I think it's really strange to be going on, particularly if we're talking about any kind of sanctions or blockading of goods and services into Gaza. Because, for example, that's what the US does when it's waging war. Now, it's not actually very good at that. But for example, the US has sanctions on Iran. Now, Biden is pretty bad about that, in the sense that when there was the prisoner exchange, was it last year or the year before? He gave them the 6 billion or however much that they wanted, and then I think just last month he gave them further access to about 10 billion in assets. But if the blockading of Gaza, so that not allowing goods in, is collective punishment, then any war is collective punishment, and collective punishment is defined as a war crime. So it's something that you're just not allowed to do. So if that's how you view collective punishment, then any war is categorically ruled out. But also then the US is doing this all the time. And he's at least not a hypocrite if he's in favor of removing all sanctions on Iran and so on. But I suspect he is in favor of that. And if he isn't, then he's a fool. So it's just an utterly bizarre thing to be coming from a US politician. And I think either just goes to the way in which they have to hold contradictions in mind, or perhaps have a kind of abstracted understanding, as you're saying. But this is an idea which needs to just be rooted out completely at the stem from the discourse around war generally, but particularly about the war in Israel, because it does not qualify. Any of this qualify as collective punishment in any way, so far as I can see. But what else did you think?
So we have a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much, and another super chat from Bonnie, but a different Bonnie, so thank you both. We also have a Michael in the members chat saying, sanctions are a violation of individual rights. And yeah, there is something weird about sanctions. You know, the whole fact that US even has relations with countries such as Iran, it should not have any. Honestly, the ideal, position of US when it comes to Iran is we act as if you don't exist, and we tell our citizens, if Iran is a dictatorship, it's a horrible country, and if you go there, we cannot protect you. And if you trade with that country or with people in that country, we cannot guarantee any security, because you cannot deal with these dictatorships. I mean, yeah, you have mentioned the hostage deal. Yeah, U.S. has released billions of dollars to Iran, and so when we talk about these U.S. sanctioning armies, I mean, it's so weird. On one hand, you're sanctioning Israel out of all countries, but then on the other hand, Qatar is this major ally of NATO. The same Qatar that basically after after the Iranian attack on Israel said to the US that they wouldn't participate in any retaliations against Iran, they wouldn't support anything. And you have many such nations, all around the world that, think of another one, Turkey, which is in NATO, that has no actual, similar goals or similar beliefs that Western countries do. Yet we still deal with it as if it's a civilized nation, as if it's an equal nation. I mean, and now we bring in the whole idea of the United Nations that, completely destroys any kind of idea of what makes a legitimate country. Basically, if you're a warlord and you take over some piece of land, you are basically a legitimate country by the UN standard.
Well, pretty much. I mean, I think once you have adopted this idea of self-determination for national groupings, then it's almost a kind of contextless view, in the sense that you have the right to self-determination just on the basis that you're a national group, no matter what kind of government ideal of government you're pursuing, or how you treat your people. And I think it's an utter disaster, and leads to so much of the immoral treatment of good nations, but also bad nations that we see going on. And as you say, Turkey, is just an increasingly fascistic nation day by day. I remember when they were holding that referendum a few years ago, and just finding it just utter disbelief, the way in which Turkey gets treated like it's a legitimate nation on the national stage nowadays. But there was something else you said that I wanted to. Oh, so back to the law, the Leahy law. I think part of it is a rationalistic understanding. So there will be politicians who don't understand, in a sense, that because that kind of statement that we saw from Patrick Leahy there, saying that, yes, I support the right to self-defense, but, and then all these qualifications on that. Some of them legitimately, I think, won't understand that the requirements they're putting on that actually means that they don't support Israel's right to self-defense. But for a lot of them, I think it has to become increasingly clear that since what they're really loyal to are the things that come after the but, so that Israel can't kill civilians, non-combatants, and all this kind of stuff. Since they're really more loyal to that than to the principle of self-defense, it must twig to them on some level that actually they can't support the idea of the right to self-defense, and they're more just saying it because they know that's what they need to say, because otherwise they'll be viewed as betraying an ally or something. But they are betraying an ally in what they're doing, and that they need to give up on that. And not only are they hypocrites, but for every day that they go on doing this, they are just betraying an ally. And I think it would be far more honest and direct for our politicians just to say, look, we don't believe that Israel has a right to self-defense, because all of the actions which it would need to pursue in order to do that, we view as illegitimate. And then, again, part of the reason why they aren't going to say that is because the actions which Israel pursues in its self-defense, even though it's doing it far too altruistically, are actions which we would need to take in our self-defense, and have taken in our self-defense recently against ISIS, but also in countless wars in the past. So the whole situation, the whole way people think about it and talk about it, is just a hopeless mess, and is one that's going to get ourselves into trouble in the future the next time that we have to go and declare war.
Yeah, and there is definitely this problem of using concepts and again just using them without actually sometimes even knowing what they are, especially if it comes to Israel's right to self-defense, or I see it the most with the idea of international law. The way people speak about the international law is almost as if it's this one paper and it says don't do bad things, and it's, or don't do things I don't agree with. Pretty much, we've seen in the discussion with Norman Finkelstein debate with Destiny and Benny Morris, Um, he was asked what does he think about the Houthis attacking merchant ships, and he was okay with it. Despite it being against international law. So for these people, these things actually don't hold any meaning. They just it's so. I think there is a word for it, like maybe concrete bound would be. They just see things they dislike, and they grab anything they can to basically go against it. One more thing I want to mention. Michael in the chat says, "Well, that is basically how all the member states were founded." Talking about how I mentioned, these countries that have just a warlord that have conquered some area and now control it, can easily go into UN. So when you talk about it, in a sense, he's right, especially since even United States, which is actually one country that has been founded on the idea of we want a free nation, and it was created from the freest nation at the time. So clearly, the idea was good, but it was also done through the act of war. But I would say, country's legitimacy is not based on how it was founded, but how is it actually protecting human rights. So that's why, even countries, that's actually the one justification you have for doing a revolution, is if your goal is to protect human rights. So when we talk about separatist movements, and I like to look into different separatist movements, most of them are based on this idea of self-determination or ethnic self-determination. When you have like Barcelona or the Basque, Spain has a lot of those for some reason, that have basically this idea of separating themselves, not because of any ideas, but just because we are different people. The only separatist movement that I've been looking for a little bit is the idea of Western Cape separating from South Africa. I keep thinking that there might be something wrong there, but it does seem like it's actually the reasons for supporting that separatism is to basically separate themselves from pro-Russian, pro. Anti-Western ANC, and the idea for the separation is to align themselves more with the West. Because if you look into it, Western Cape is the one country, one like province, or I don't know what they call the separations, one part of the country that is not ANC dominated, that is actually ruled by the opposition.
Yes. I mean, this isn't particularly germane, but the separatist movement that's looking like it's going to topple at the moment, at least in terms of its government, is the Scottish government, who are looking like they're going to lose their Green Party support. And, I can only wish that's going to happen. But what you were saying about warlords, yeah, a lot of UN nations are old. So, the UK is founded by warlords. You could basically say, if we're talking about England. But the countries in the UN which are good are countries for whom that's long in their history. And, if we were talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict and what the Palestinian cause was representing was a cause that wanted to introduce modernity and a greater influence of Enlightenment thought into the area. And even if the initial government phase or something still resembled the pre-existing kind of dictatorships, but was moving towards a written constitution and constitutional government and all that kind of stuff, then I think we'd be talking about something fairly different. But I was looking at recently, I don't know if you know about this movement called Islamic modernism that was around in the late 19th century. And these were Islamic thinkers who traveled to Europe and wanted to bring back aspects of Enlightenment thought and introduce them into the Arabic world. And that some of them are really impressive. There's this guy, God, what's his name? I can't remember. It's Mohammed something, something or other. They're all called Mohammed, who was an Egyptian lawyer. And he wrote this book called Theology of Unity. And he's talking about the importance of reason, not relying on dogmatic tradition, and all this kind of stuff. And it's really impressive. However, unfortunately, that kind of movement, as far as I can see, was defeated by Salafism and Wahhabism, which have become dominant in the Middle East and which are influencing the Palestinian causes today. So yeah, so we're not talking about, there is no basis for that kind of potentially better Palestinian movement. I mean, we could only long that would be the case. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean, we're slowly wrapping up, but yeah, people often talk about this idea of a two-state solution. But whenever you're talking about it, you have to realize you need someone on the Palestinian side to negotiate with, even if there was and you when you look at actually what the Palestinians want, they don't want a two-state solution, or if they want it, it's only because that would be the best way to destroy Israel. Most of the Palestinians, even in the West Bank, support Ismail Haniyeh, who is the head of Hamas. They support October 7th. Even when election was a long time ago. I mean, they don't need another one because the sympathies are pretty much the same. But even when there was the election, the 20 years ago or however long, it was the most votes was won by Fatah. Then it was Hamas, and I think there is one party I saw there called Third Way. I don't know much about it. It seems like it's one country that might be willing to actually live one side by side with Jews, but it's a party that got like 2 seats. So, and I don't even know if it would actually be this sort of like westernizing pro-Jewish, or meaning as in being okay with living side by side with Jews place. And so one answer I would give to people arguing for a two-state solution: if Palestinians were okay to live side by side with Jews, as many Arabs in Israel proper do, there would be no need for a two-state solution. You could just have a one country where both of these people live at the same place. And as we've seen with Arabs in Israel, the only reason why you can't have that right now is because what Palestinians actually want is to get rid of all the Jews.
yes. I mean, and linking what you were saying about the two-state solution back to the laws we were talking about, the United States support for the two-state solution, particularly if we're thinking about in the context of the 90s, was a way in which, though perhaps not intentionally, was a way in which they were undermining Israel by encouraging it to make concessions to what was still openly a hostile side, a hostile cause to them, and which the PLO was openly saying that the peaceful negotiations were just ways in which they were going to try and get further land, and then they hadn't abandoned violent means permanently, and which we've seen completely fail. And then these laws and this sanction of this brigade and unit, although it's relatively small compared to the whole support for the two-state solution, is a way in which the US does not support Israel's right to defend itself, and is not really an ally of Israel. I know that they give them various funding and that was approved just recently and all this kind of stuff. So you could really say that they're mixed on it, but by being mixed on it, they really just betray Israel the whole time. What the US needs to do is give them their full-throated support and not constantly undermine them and undercut them and demand that they fight with one or even two hands tied behind their back, because that's not what an ally does. But okay, so we've got just a minute left. TRS Extra is coming up for the YouTube channel members and the ARC UK members. I hope you'll join us there. We're talking about O.J. Simpson and his trial, his death, and Leonard Peikoff's talk, which should be interesting. We'll have James with us as well. So that should be really good. I hope we see you all there, and see you later.
Bye-bye.